Hey guys, welcome back. It's Meg, and today we are going to be going over the hardest encounters and how to heal them. Starting off, we have a tyrannical Ancient Protectors from Everbloom. This boss is less about what you can do and more about how you work together as a team. This boss relies really heavily on positioning as well as kick management between the on-target and the off-target. Something to be aware of, and what I just died to here, was that the casters will occasionally just randomly melee, so that is something to keep in mind. This was actually the first time that I had seen that, but very similar to witches, it's just something to keep in mind. There's a lot of encounters this season where mobs will just randomly melee, but this is a good boss to be in Discord for. Obviously that is going to help a lot, especially with coordinating kicks, and if you don't have a kick up, then to call for a defensive or a health pot or something of that matter. The heal check on this boss is high, but it does become a bit more difficult when kicks are not happening properly. For this boss, typically I will stay with Dulhu, who is the large charging boss. He is the one that is actually able to move on this fight. This is largely because I want to be able to cleave constantly off of the other caster mob that he is near for the Ancient Teachings and for the Chi healing if that is a cooldown that I have active. But generally keeping up all of your hots on everybody and then using Chi to play catch up in a way is something that I would definitely recommend when doing this encounter. You also want to make sure that you are not dropping the poison puddles in the melee range so that you are not forcing yourself out of melee when you don't need to. Being able to roll backwards and Transcendence back in is something that you'll see me do a lot, or vice versa, Transcendence out and roll back in, that is also an option. But the couple seconds of downtime that you get from baiting the puddles during the charge is going to heavily outweigh the time spent trying to maneuver around the puddles if you don't drop them properly. So puddle management, kick management, defensives, and then just cycling between Chi and Chaelin's Gift is pretty much going to be your ticket out of this boss. It gets significantly easier after the first caster dies because you have way less casts happening, and then it's just a little dance between kicking Gola, dodging the charge, and then coming back in. This is one of the few bosses this season that so far I actually have had to keep an eye on my mana, particularly during the 3-phase portion of this fight where all of the mobs are alive. This is just due to the spot healing or the kind of panic healing when someone gets 2 bolts in a row and doesn't have a defensive into the charge or things like that. There's a lot of unpredictable damage that is actually going to be healable. You just have to be quick with it. So that is something to keep in mind. Usually if you are rolling out of melee and you're dropping off the poison puddles outside of the melee area, you can drink your tea and then end up going back in after that while you're waiting for it, so you're not just sitting there doing nothing. You're either putting up hots or you're drinking your mana tea to prep for the next damage once you come back in after the charge. Something to be aware of as a tank, there is some travel time on the charge, so if you do leap back onto your group with the circle, you're gonna kill them. Now you know. For Sol, this is the boss right after Ancient Protectors, also in Everbloom. You are going to use Chi and a defensive right off the bat because she is going to open up with fire every single time. And then you can see on the left side of my frames, I have my raid ability timeline. This is a weak aura that I really recommend for just PvE in general because it helps put your bigwigs or DBM timers in a really digestible fashion, especially mid-combat, so you're able to call out what's happening. During all of this, I am calling what combination of schools that we will have, so Fire Arcane, Fire Frost, Frost Arcane, Arcane Fire, anything like that. We are getting ready for that next mechanic coming up. Typically, the scariest combination is Fire and Frost because there is forced movement with the Fire if you get Fire Swirlies, as well as forced movement with the Frost because they're going to be closing in on their spawn locations. So it's going to be a lot of movement. If you don't have Revival, then you don't really have a whole lot of healing during that, and that is where defensives are going to become the most important for your group. Fire Arcane is another one that you do have to look out for, but it's not nearly as dangerous as the Frost Fire overlap. Because in this case, you can bait away the Arcane. All you have to do is make sure that you are not getting dragged through fire puddles, and the Arcane is baited on your furthest player. In our case, in this run, it is our Warlock who's doing the Arcane baits. Next up, we have Frost and Fire again. I don't have a whole lot for this. I do have Shaylin's Gift and Revival if I need it, but typically I will try to not send more than one cooldown per phase for Fire. And then the Arcane and Frost phases is kind of like a cooldown period where you're not going to be sending major cooldowns because there's no damage going out. This is where you can wait for your defensives to come back, where you're going to drink your mana tea as you prep for the next fire coming up, anything along those lines. This is another one of the bosses where managing your mana is important because there is not unpredictable damage, but there is still a lot of damage happening. If you are using defensives on the fire portion, you do have to pop it slightly early, otherwise the Cinderbolt Storm is just going to go straight through your defensive. There's something weird about the boss where if you use your defensive after her cast has started and the projectiles are in the air, it's not going to count your defensive as actually working. We've had this happen with Turtle and with Cloak. I've seen it happen with Diffuse as well, where the defensive just doesn't do anything if you're too late on pressing it. So that is definitely something to be aware of and to let your group know. For this boss, it is also really important to be tracking your group's defensives, or just to be kind of aware of how much damage they take in general. Warlock should never need anything from you. Typically, I end up using my Cocoon and my Leaf on either myself or my Evoker. DH is pretty solid here. If we have a Hunter, he usually gets a lot of it, or a Mage, they will usually get my externals. But just being aware of the class's squishiness with and without defensives is really helpful for this fight, and knowing when people have things up. Typically on this fight, and I'm sure you've seen it, I'm not really using Chi-Ji so much for the Gust of Mist because it is single target and I have relatively low mastery. But basically what I'm trying to do is get use out of my Chi Cocoon, the shields, trying to get one set of Enveloping Breath out on at least half of the group, which is usually the melee, because I know that the range are going to be spread, and then using Shaylin's Gift to kind of finish it off. So it's not the optimal use of Chi-Ji, but it is something in this situation that just makes this boss a little bit easier, is not having to worry about trying to heal through the Cinderstorm with Chi-Ji on single target, but more using the passive and secondary effects of the actual ability. For the witches in Waycrest Manor, these aren't necessarily hard when it comes to healing, but the positioning can be kind of tricky. The inactive witches will be meleeing you if they are kicked, and because you are generating healing threat, you're going to have threat on them most of the time, unless your tank is doing really well about taunting them. During the first phase is the most dangerous part, but during the later phases after they've already had their turn to be active once, then it should be totally fine. That being said, always be aware this is on your tank to position them properly, because you still want them close so you can cleave off of them, but not so close that you are standing in between them where you can get meleeed. The first phase is pretty much just about getting your hot set up for the second phase, Lady Malady. This is where most of the damage is going to be happening, and this is also where we use Chi-Ji. For the Aura of Dread, I prefer to jump up and down because I have had issues with strafing not counting as much movement so that it doesn't clear my stacks, and honestly jumping is just more fun. During this, depending on your melee, you may have to step out if you have a heavy melee comp, just for those runic circles. We are excellent at healing off the Jagged Nettles. You can use Cocoon for one, you can use Shaylin's Gift for one. If it's on yourself and you still have 3 witches, you can even use your Zen Pulse. You can also use Expel Harm on yourself. Typically this phase or the first phase is when I will be drinking my mana tea to get ready for the Aura of Dread Lady again. This is just because there's not much happening here outside of the Jagged Nettles every so often, and then in the first phase you have the 50% reduced healing, so there's not much damage going out there, well, especially if you're getting your kicks. This positioning right here is pretty much perfect because you can cleave onto the witches without getting meleeed by them. Once again, just using this 50% reduced phase to try to get all of my hots out in prep for Lady Malady. You can see right there our evoker got meleeed. He was just a touch closer than I was, but he still did end up getting hit. Down to 2 witches, so your cleave is going to be a little bit weaker here, but you should still be fine, especially since you should have had a chance for your cooldowns to come back up. You can see even though I wasn't in melee, I still had a couple seconds on Chi-Ji, so I just went ahead and hard casted an enveloping on myself to get that enveloping breath buff. And after this, we just have one more set of Briar. This is the Nettles boss. I don't have any defensives for it, but I do have my Leaf. If it does go on me, I'm not going to melt it off because I am the easiest to heal off of, just through my Expel Harm and everything. For the Soulbound Goliath, most of the damage that's going to be happening during this fight is the Soul Thorn victim as well as the fire clearing phase. When it comes to our Soul Thorn target, it depends on basically who gets it. If it's on a mage, you never have to deal with it because it's just going to be a fake root due to their ability to blink, and there's a couple other classes that have this interaction. But whenever it is someone who cannot break it consistently every time, you do need to watch out for their health. Typically, the way that we will be handling those is using either Life Cocoon or our Leaf. If you're using the Leaf, you will need to provide them with additional healing through our Soothing Mist single target rotation. For the fire portion of this, I like to pre-pop Chi-Ji, and then when the burning actually starts, throw out that last enveloping that you have. You can go ahead and top people with Shaylin's Gift, but make sure that you are not getting punched by the ghosts. These are a healer mechanic, but if you have DPS that do any off healing, they need to be aware of threat as well, especially if they have something large like Lay on Hands. Mass Barrier also is something that has been an issue in the past, because they work off of healing threat, and there's no way that your tank can build threat off of them outside of healing as well. Depending on the defensive that you have active, you can tank a couple of punches from the ghost, though generally I recommend just rolling out, using Shaylin's and any other spot healing that you may have. A common strategy that has come up for this boss on high enough keys is actually running the PvP trinket to allow yourself a get out of jail free card at least once. This isn't something that I would expect in pugs, but as you get into higher keys, it may be a strategy that you want to adopt. There can be some situations where the fire will actually spawn on the Goliath and trigger the fire phase without there being much that you can do about it, so I would recommend always having the Renewing Mist on everyone, as well as making sure that you are keeping an eye on your mana throughout the entirety of the fight, just in case you do need to pop some emergency heals. For the Crushing Depths mechanic in Throne of the Tides, this is a trash mechanic. This is the giant heal absorb that you see going out on DPS. There's a couple of ways to handle this. I believe Mistweaver is probably the best healer for this mechanic. We kind of trivialize it. It's really not that big of a deal. The first one went out on our mage and I just healed him up through Chi-Ji, typically using the Gust of Mist portion and the Cleave portion due to the large group size. That is one way to use it if you're doing it with Chi-Ji. Another way to handle this mechanic is through our normal single target rotation, making sure to utilize our Chi Harmony from our tier set for that increased healing. Going out again on our mage here, I am popping Chi-Ji, and you can see his health chunk up after I build and spend my Teachings of the Monastery stacks. The second one is out here. I went ahead and sent Shaylin's Gift as well with Enveloping Breath, so it heals for quite a bit more than it would normally. This is just our normal single target rotation with our Chi Harmony tier set. There I've applied my Chi Harmony as well as Enveloping Mist, and then sent a 7 stack of Shaylins and topped him off with a Vivify to get rid of the last portion. And we will get one last crushing here. I have Chi-Ji, but I only have one target, so I'm not going to be using it. I see that he's casting on the mage once again, putting up that Renewing Mist for Chi Harmony, throwing Enveloping Mist on there, and then single target healing him up with Shaylins and Vivify. That is most often the method that you're going to use. Here I will be using Chi-Ji. He has his Enveloping Breath, Enveloping Mist, and it just takes really a couple of globals to get them completely out of this. You can see how much healing happens during that Chi-Ji with Cleave. Once again applying Chi Harmony, Enveloping Mist, and then sending a Shaylins with an instant Vivify, and it is completely healed off. Mistweaver is very good at handling this mechanic, especially if we have multiple targets to hit. Even if you're in comms with your group, the Crushing Depths mechanic can be kind of scary, especially if you are doing the Chi-Ji method where you're building and spending, where they may not see their absorb getting any smaller for a couple of globals here at a time. If you get lucky and you get the mechanic, you can definitely get yourself out of it very easily between your Expel Harm, your Enveloping Mist, and your Chi Harmony. I have had situations where I get a really good Expel Harm off and it heals me for like 2 million or something like that, and it just becomes the easiest mechanic in the world. Once again here, we have pre-set up our Enveloping Mist, our Renewing Mist for Chi Harmony, we send a Shaylins, and Vivify spam the rest of the shield off. We have our single target healing rotation, Life Cocoon, Shaylin's Gift, and we have one more trick up our sleeve, and that is Zen Pulse with Echoing Reverberation. You can see it goes on the DH here, one button, it's gone. That was only Zen Pulse taking care of that. We did have the heal amp from our tier set, as well as the healing increase and the double proc from Enveloping Mist and Echoing Reverberation, and that can be used on melee players or on ranged if they are within range of the mobs. For Mindbender Ghur'sha, this boss is a little spooky, especially as we get into Tyrant Keys on this guy. That application of the Flame Shock does insane damage, and then the tick is very quick as well. So you want to make sure that you are dispelling on cooldown as quickly as you can. This is not going to work the entire time. You're going to have some overlaps where you have 2 active, or where you're just going to want to let one kind of roll over. So if you can get a dispel on it immediately, then definitely dispel. However, if your dispel is still on cooldown, it may just be worth letting it sit. You can see here I put Cocoon up on them, and then I'm just going to be dispelling the fresh one and letting the old one sit and time out with the defensive. That is how I handle the entire fight. If there is any type of overlap where I cannot immediately dispel the first debuff, then I will just dispel the second one and heal through the first. You can diffuse this debuff for big damage if you get it, so definitely make sure that you are holding diffuse for that. Otherwise, you also have, depending on your route, you have a get out of jail free card with revival for a set of 2 debuffs. You only have to deal with this portion of the fight for the first half, so you are kind of running the race of trying to get out of this phase as quickly as possible before people run out of defensives or any type of healing cooldown for these debuffs. Typically, if it's on myself and I don't have diffuse, I'll let it sit if I am the first or second person, just because I know that I have infinite self-healing, whereas I don't have as many tools for other players. Like, I have Expel Harm, and I also have my Zen Pulse, which I know that I'll be with at least 2 targets if the totem's up. So it's just a little bit more consistent that way, and I know what tools I have, whereas if I'm looking at the rest of my group or I'm in a pug, I may not know what they have. Dwarf also works for this, and any other type of Dispel, Mass Dispel from priests, things like that all work. And then at this point forward, it is just line of sighting everything and recovering from the first phase. This is not a high throughput portion. You can pretty much get by on just your normal damage rotation, healing through Ancient Teachings, and using those instant vivifies when you need to. For the manifested Timeways in Galakrond's Fall, this boss has been giving a lot of people some issues considering they fixed the cheese that people were doing very early on in the season, in the first couple of weeks, so because that no longer works, we actually have to do the fight the way that they intended. You can see the rotating hourglass shape on the floor, our pizza slices here. The light portion is nice because you get that buff, but the dark portion is a DR, so you want to make sure that when you're doing the dispels, that the non-dispel people stand in the dark area, and the dispel people, as they're being dispelled, stand in the light area. So for this boss, I usually only actually dispel one person, and I will be calling it out so that they know not to move, because there is an issue with it double ticking if you're moving while dispelled, or while it expires. So I will call my dispel, or if you're not in comms, you can use the ping system, and just let people know beforehand that you are going to be dispelling the pinged person so that they know not to move and they know to be in the light area, and then everyone else is in the dark. Once that expires, after the first dispel, we will heal people back up, we will get back into the dark area, and the other one will fall off. If anyone is in the light area when you are dispelling, it is going to do some pretty significant damage, and it may even one-shot depending on if you were topped or not, or if you have a defensive running, and it depends on the key level as well. The boss isn't very mechanically challenging. There is a bit of a heal check between that first dispel and the expiring debuff, but generally it is just about getting your Chi G out. You can use it a little early to help deal with the ticking that the dot actually does. And you can spread your enveloping breaths, and then you can Shaylunce between dispels and then heal people up through instant vivifies and ancient teachings after the second debuff has fallen off. Sometimes when we only get one debuff, it could be a number of things. In the first situation that we had, it was a meta immune, and in the second one, it was a lucky guess with spell bop. So there are ways to do that, though they're not required to do the fight, it just makes it a little bit easier. Most of the time I try to dispel my squishier people first. I will often let it sit on the evoker or on the mage because they are going to be in a little bit more trouble. In this case, I did dispel myself first because I had diffuse and I wanted to utilize that DR portion for the second dispel. But typically the mage and the evoker are my prio targets. If we had hunter, it would be them. Generally not demon hunter because they have tattoos and they take less damage from magic by default. I hope that you guys found this video helpful, and if you have any comments or questions, feel free to ask down below or while I am live on Twitch. Thanks for watching!